KCHO author Gayle Kimball is a life coach and teacher who has written more than 20 books. For her most recent book, Masculinity, she spoke to 33 men from 12 countries, various ages and ethnicities, a variety of viewpoints, in different branches of the men's movement. For another recent book, Gayle Kimball interviewed 30 global couples about their happy marriages. For example, Chico couple Joe and Terry Matthews, and Olya and Maxim from Ukraine. Today I'm going to ask retired Professor Kimball what we can learn from the personal experiences of these 30 couples to enhance our own relationships. Gayle Kimball, welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. And I know you had a long, happy marriage personally, so you are a good case study as well.
Well, I remember when you asked me a question, this was some years ago, about my marriage, and you said, would you say you're best friends? And I said, that term just doesn't seem adequate. We're so much more than best friends. So I still ponder that question sometimes and think, well, how do I even describe that? So I haven't arrived at a conclusion. But I do know that this is a subject of interest for you, long-standing. And the stories you collected were so fascinating. I think every one of us, unless we were a hermit and live on some mountaintop, would benefit from reading this book. Whether or not we're interested in a marriage, it's just getting along with just human relations. I think there's so much good advice in your book.
Thank you.
So, how did you approach this study? Because you've got couples from all over the world. And how did you go about collecting? Because they're all fascinating. Their stories are so interesting. How did you go about collecting their stories?
I started with couples that I interviewed in the 80s for my books, 50-50 Marriage and 50-50 Parenting, because I thought, it's been decades. It's fairly easy to get married, but it's not so easy to make a marriage last in a satisfying way over decades, especially if you have children or illness or other challenges. So I started with them, and then it was hard to track down people after so many decades. So I developed kind of networks around the world from previous books. So I drew on some of those people, and I also asked listservs like a Women's Studies listserv if they could recommend people. And then whoever I interviewed, I did snowball sampling and asked them, who do you know that is a good example of someone who's made marriage work over time? So I came up with, as you said, 30 couples from 11 countries, and I wanted to include many different types. So I did first marriages, second marriage, people in their third marriage. I did a couple of trans couples where both were transgender. I did couples that were from different ethnic backgrounds or national backgrounds. I organized the book around challenges. So I think that we have to realize that's what we need to make a good relationship, is have the skills to overcome challenges. So the challenges that I found were arranged marriages. That was with my two couples from India. Of course, children and in-laws, cross-cultural marriages, opposites attract, physical and emotional challenges like having an illness, chronic illness, and couples who were in love as teenagers and stayed together happily ever after, which kind of surprised me.
Well, you deal with your research in Chapter 1, and then Chapter 2, you have energy tools for intimacy, and I was interested in their take on this because before I met my husband, I was very logical. I mean, I understood chemistry and physics, but poetry, I don't get it. And then I met this person, and I knew instantly, this is a person I want to spend the rest of my life with. And they deal with this invisible, they meaning Donna Eden and David Feinstein, deal with this invisible energy. And what did you get from your conversation with these two experts on the call?
They're a really interesting couple. Donna Eden is famous for her energy medicine. She does a lot of work with acupressure, balancing to deal with all kinds of ailments. And her husband, David Feinstein, is a complete opposite. He's an intellectual psychologist, PhD. Their typologies are totally different. So they feel like they're a pretty good example of how to make a marriage work, because they believe that we do tend to attract our opposites so that we can balance out and grow, because the purpose of life, in my opinion, is to evolve, get better and better, be better parts of the creation. And so they were willing to separate. They drove each other crazy because she was emotional, fiery, impulsive, bubbly, and he was cool, calm, collected, analytical, rational. So they developed a kind of technique for how you work through these differences. And the first one is to understand your typology. They think we have this basic innate typology that they draw from a Chinese traditional medicine. So you could be wood, fire, water, earth, metal. So Donna is fire and earth, and David is metal. So first is to understand that, because I think that half of any battle is understanding the dynamics of the battle. And then they felt like you have to do a kind of attunement process, get energetically balanced. And they do a little demo that I put on my YouTube channel if anybody wants to see them in action. They kind of demonstrate how you resolve a disagreement, a lack of understanding. And they said you have to make it work, have a pact, an agreement, a contract. And they have it, the acronym is STAR. And so the first thing, the S, is if you and I are in conflict, we stop. And like HeartMath Institute has a meditation called the freeze framer, where you think of putting the video of the conflict or the problem on freeze frame. So they do the same kind of thing, freeze frame it. And then probably a lot of the listeners are familiar with acupressure tapping, emotional freedom technique, one of the energy psychologies. And so they would have you tap together so that you balance the energy field. And then you attune to each other. And that could be as simple as I look at your feet, you look at my feet, we bring our eyes up, we look at each other eye to eye. They have various kind of attunement process. And after we do the kind of getting in harmony, discharging the negativity associated with our conflict, then we can do the R, which is to resolve the issue. And that would involve what a lot of people know about active listening. Sounds like you're feeling this way, Nancy. Is that right? And then Nancy would say, well, you're partly right, but I really feel like this. Oh, so you feel like, yeah. So a lot of people know those kind of good active listening communication skills, but they say you can't just hop into that because there's too much out of sync and you won't go anywhere. And Warren Farrell also has a method for resolving conflict that's involves getting attuned and calm and that kind of thing. And he and I did a demonstration on my YouTube channel where we pretend we're brother and sister in conflict. And so we kind of demonstrate his technique for how to resolve conflict in a way that's productive for everyone. He calls it sharing and caring.
My guest is Gayle Kimball, and she has written many books. One of her recent ones, Happy Marriages, where she interviewed 30 couples all over the world, tell their stories. A lot of them at one time or still do live in Chico's. I was surprised how many people I knew. And your photographs, as you tell about each couple, you have a photograph of the couple. Usually it's when they got married. For example, the cover is a couple getting married in Greece. But even as I look at the pictures from long ago, I could recognize these people. Oh, that's so-and-so. That's what they looked like when they were younger.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed it on that level. Now, your first a couple of couples were from India, and this is a question those of us in America who think, oh, you should be in love with this person, and romance is so important, and yet that doesn't seem to be necessary. What did you learn about the couples in India?
Well, I had that same kind of predisposition assumption, but what they would point out in India is 45% of our marriages end in divorce. And in the U.S., the marriage rate is going down, the divorce rate is going down, but still it's really high. And they don't have a high divorce rate at all. It's really low. And I really got a kick out of this. One of the women I interviewed, named Ranji, is a teacher. And I got to meet her and her husband when I was in New Delhi, where they live. And what she said that's great about arranged marriages is you don't have to go through the dating scene. you don't have to go, oh, you picked a handsome man, you were so wonderful, and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to be the flirty, concerned about how you look all the time kind of scene. And the other thing they would say about arranged marriages is it's very carefully planned out. They check your astrological chart. They interview people who know you. They know your family background, your religious background, your education, and that kind of thing. So the kind of educated elite that I met when I was in India, the process is very, very thorough. So you end up marrying someone who's compatible and has similar values and background. So that reduces a lot of conflict, and also reduces conflict that you have supportive family. Like Ranji lives with her father-in-law, who's a widower, and she adores him. He's been their main babysitter. He's taking care of the kids so she could be a professional. So the idea is when they get married, they commit to it. They don't think, if it doesn't work out, we'll get divorced. And they don't just go on sexual attraction, which can wane. They do a kind of careful study. So you can make an argument for that.
My guest is Gayle Kimball, and we're talking about her book, Happy Marriages, 30 Global Couples Tell Their Stories. We'll be back to continue our conversation after a short break. You're listening to Nancy's Bookshelf on North State Public Radio. I'm Nancy Wiegman.
It's the healing power of music with gospel singer Cora Harvey Armstrong, mixology rapper and fancy dancer Superman, songmaker Jesse Colin Young, and Santana on Reincarnation. Plus songs of elixirs for pain relief from the flu to love sickness. On American Roots from PRX.
Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock here on North State Public Radio. 91.7 FM Chico and 88.9 FM Reading, online at mynspr.org. Hi there, I'm Andrew Garcia. Thank you for tuning in to Nancy's Bookshelf. Support comes from Jake at J&J Automotive. J&J Automotive offers scheduled maintenance and repair for Subaru and Volvo, as well as other makes new and old. Also offering pre-trip vehicle checkups, information, directions, and scheduling at jnjautomotivechico.com.
I'm Nancy Wiegman, and you're listening to Nancy's Bookshelf on North State Public Radio. I'm back with my guest, Gayle Kimball, and she's written 20 books. And the one we're talking about today is Happy Marriages, where she interviewed couples from all over the world and had them tell their stories. Well, those of us here in the West think, oh, India had a caste system, so I guess you don't marry outside your caste. But is that still the case?
It kind of depends. Educated people are getting away from it. They think that it's archaic and discriminatory and that kind of thing. But in villages, among people who aren't educated, I still hear stories of families who shun an offspring who marries someone from a lower caste, that kind of thing. There's still a lot of problems connected with marriage in India. Bride burnings, dowry burnings, they call them. So the family wants to get rid of the bride and get another one to bring in a dowry. And, there's definitely cases where the daughter-in-law is treated like a servant by her mother-in-law. So I'm not suggesting that they have an impeccable marriage record. They don't. The divorce rate is low, but there's also a lot of suffering. And people who are divorced, there's a lot of stigma attached to it in some areas.
My guest is Gayle Kimball, and among her many books she has written is Happy Marriages, 30 Global Couples Tell Their Stories. And you were just mentioning couples that get together because their families arrange their marriage and they don't even know this person they're going to be marrying. Which brings up me now to, you have a chapter 5, cross-cultural marriages, where that's some culture that we're not familiar with, but the couple themselves are from different cultures. And for example, Noreen and Andy, Jordan and Wisconsin, and how did they get along?
Their story is amazing. That's one of the most entertaining, fascinating chapters. Maybe you'll agree. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in Jordan, in the Middle East, and they met when she was a hotel worker, and he was doing some work in the hotel. And all together, they spent, I don't know, what was it, 40 hours or something together before they got married. They really feel like their marriage was destiny. And some other couples felt like, well, you said that some people just have this sense of this is meant to be. And that
I get that feeling.
Yeah. It could be explained by karma and reincarnation, that this is someone that you've been with in previous lifetimes and you have unfinished business and you love each other and want to be together again. So I think that's one way to explain that recognition. Aha, you're my partner. Yay, we get to dance again in this lifetime. But Noreen and Andy definitely felt like that. And they lived in the Middle East for their firstborn to grow up a little bit so they could spend time with her mother and her family. And then they moved to he's a teacher, so they moved to Pennsylvania and then to LA, and now they're in Washington, D.C. And she works in the hotel industry and he teaches, and they have 2 beautiful daughters. And they, like any couple, they have challenges. So I'm not saying it's, get married and live happily ever after. That's not the case. But they truly love each other and feel like it was their destiny, even though they came from such different cultures. Just the story of dealing with Islam and being permitted to get married there is worth reading that chapter. It's really an adventure story. They put up with a lot.
Well, for the most part, these other couples at least spoke the same language, mostly.
Yeah, right.
But Noreen, English was not her first language.
Oh no, and he said his Arabic was like elementary school level. So they did a lot of texting. That's how they communicated a lot. Because, in the Middle East, young single adults are not supposed to be hanging out together unchaperoned. So they did a lot of texting.
So this is Noreen and Andy. And you look at them, Jordan and Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And where are they now?
In Washington, D.C. They didn't like LA.
LA.
They were living in an apartment during the pandemic, and they all went kind of stir crazy there. They said even the beaches were closed. So they wanted to get out of LA.
Well, there's another couple. The following story is about another couple who speak different languages. And Renee and Casper, their story, well, all the stories are so fascinating, but what happened between Renee and Casper?
Her first marriage was to a physician, and he met someone else, and they divorced with 2 children. And then she met a Polish immigrant who was a great dancer, great lover, fun guy. And I don't think she thought of him as a marriage partner. He was just her, like, playboy after her divorce. But then he went back to Poland, and then he looked her up when she came back. And she realized, despite their differences, she thinks that it's wrong to expect your partner to be like you. She recognized that they have very distinct differences, including language facility, and but they love each other, support each other, have fun together, sing together, had great sex together. So that's another case of chemistry and maybe some kind of destiny despite the odds.
Well, they did have a common language in dance, because I have always loved to dance, and my husband and I got married on a Friday, and I convinced him to come to a dance class on Monday. So he became a convert, and to appease my enthusiasm for dance.
Well, having danced with your husband, I will say he is a good dancer. He was a good dancer. So you did the work.
Well, then Renee and Casper are quite old now. I was surprised that they're like one of your older couples.
Yep, she's in her 80s.
Yeah.
Happily
Now-
married.
Yeah. Now you have.
Well, I want to say one thing about him. She was critical of him and talked to counselors and women's groups and that kind of thing. And they said, why don't you stop criticizing him and praise him and appreciate the points that you like about him? And she said that made all the difference. That really changed their relationship. He improved, she improved, and her switch from criticism to praise saved their marriage.
Well, at one point in the early part of your book, you quote George Bach listing steps for conflict resolution. And the title of this section is Intimacy Requires Kind Communication. And so it sounds like that's what she did. Renee, began to be kinder to Casper.
Yes, absolutely, you're right. Yes. And that's definitely what the world needs now.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Kindness, yeah.
And you have suggestions through your book. And one of the things that I liked when you talk, and this is not just marriages, this is any relationship.
Yes.
When you talk about the importance of listening. And it's not just sitting there quietly. And what do you recommend when we really listen?
Well, the counseling center at Chico State really emphasizes active listening. They want their counselors that kind of turn out of their program to know how to listen, because they feel that it doesn't work to tell people what to do. It's better to evoke a self-solution. So what we find is that most people will listen and then say, oh yeah, that reminds me of when that happened to me.
Yeah.
Or they'll say, well, why don't you do so-and-so? Your boss did that? Oh, you should tell your boss, blah, 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 blah. And what the active listening experts say is, first we need to just get to vent our feelings. We don't want to go into problem solving when we're angry, upset, or whatever. So it's a great gift just to listen to your friend, your partner, your colleague, and let them vent and let them know that you understand. Oh, you're feeling really frustrated because your boss did so-and-so. Yeah, I'm really frustrated that my boss did so-and-so. So it seems like, oh, that's simple and obvious, but most people don't do it. Again, they do, oh, yeah, that happened to me, or you should do, and we especially train men to be problem solvers. So men especially feel like they should present you with a solution. That's their duty as a good man. So it may be even more difficult for a man to restrain his desire to solve the problem and just do active listening where you reflect back how they're feeling. It seems simple, but most people don't do it. So I think you'll find people who do it get a lot of people talking to them.
Well, I have a friend who notices immediate self-references. In fact, he refers to it in shorthand, ISR, meaning immediate self-reference. And so when I came to your paragraph in your book, I read this paragraph to him. I said, look, she talks about immediate self-reference. And his eyes widened. He said, she uses that phrase? I said, no, here's what she actually said. The most powerful step to discovery is to take regular time to actually listen, in boldface, listen to each other, giving total attention without giving advice, judgment, or interjecting our own experiences. Learning not to give advice while listening may be especially difficult to men who have been trained to be problem solvers. And that's exactly what you just said. And I remember early in my marriage, a lot of the differences, I thought, well, that's just a difference between him and me. And then I realized, no, that's a gender difference. That's typical of men. The way he was acting was typical of the way men operate. And so I learned to appreciate, okay, that's just a difference, and he's being a typical man.
You know, that gender differences is really interesting, and I think the person who's done the most research is John Gottman,
Yes.
Gottman. I write about him in the book, and he has what he calls his love lab in Washington, and it's scientific. You know, he has people hooked up to electronic measurements and that kind of thing, and he studies which couples are likely to make it. And what he found is that the couples who make it are 5 times more likely to be encouraging. Oh, tell me more. Oh, yeah, I get it. Those kind of encouraging comments mean their marriage is more likely to survive. And he also found that, this is kind of a widely known fact, that women are 80% likely to bring up an emotional issue in the marriage. Honey, we got to talk about this. And the reason that women are more likely to bring it up is because Gottman found men are more likely to what he calls flood, F-L-O-O-D, to get inundated, overwhelmed. Oh, this is too much, I can't handle it, in an emotional exchange. So I think that's an important gender difference to understand in relationships, that it just may be more punishing for men to be in an emotional disagreement. That's something kind of interesting to think about, huh?
Yeah, and I do find it interesting in how communication takes place, because I remember my husband died almost 9 years ago. He and I would go in our respective closets and come out wearing the same color, like purple or something unusual. And so we were kind of picking up that similar vibration. But I found this new relationship is you say in your book, you finish each other's sentences, and I and this friend seem to know what the other's thinking. In your book, you say, we know what each other's thinking. I'll say something to him, and he'll say, I've just been thinking about that. Are you in my head again? That happens a lot. And I sometimes with this friend wonder, well, now, who originated that thought? Because we'll say it at the same time. And so I noticed that this happens with some couples, that there's a communication that is beyond verbal, beyond words.
Yes.
And
we go back to Donna Eden and David Feinstein, who say that's really important to attune that non-verbal, non-intellectual part of our interaction. You know, another kind of, I think, profound help to understanding relationships is Hal and Sidra Stone. They're therapists who developed voice dialogue. And what they point out, they also, like Feinstein and Eden, felt like they were going to divorce. They were so different, and then they developed this technique for how to understand each other. And they also feel like we attract our opposite in order to be able to grow and kind of harmonize. But they want us to understand what our subpersonalities are, and that we, if we understand, oh, I'm talking to your inner child, or your inner critic, or your inner judge, or that kind of thing, that in other words, relationships are like icebergs, and the part we are conscious of is small, and the big influence from our family, from our unconscious personalities, from our histories is the big part of the iceberg under the water we don't see. But to make a marriage work, we need to be conscious of it.
I know an instance of a couple of men who had been friends for a while. They just got along great. And then one day they didn't agree on something. And one of them said, "You remind me of my father."
Yeah.
And so I realized, well, then his friend didn't really have a chance, because he was condemned to be put in that category with this guy's father. And I think that, and you mentioned this in your book, I think you call them family ghosts.
Yeah.
That these kind of things come up. And, one friend could be just an innocent, I started to use the word victim, of this other person's family history.
Right. And that's all of us. I mean, because we weren't raised by wolves or something in the woods. So we all have, in a relationship, there's you and me, and there's my mother and my father and my grandparents and your mother and your father and your siblings and my past relationships and your past relationships. So yeah, those ghosts play an important part in how we react to our partner, what we project on them.
Well, I got the impression, too, in your book that it's helpful to see a psychotherapist, because some of these hidden, say, sentiments, feelings that we are not aware of, we operate on these, and a psychotherapist can help. Oh, that's why I said this to my wife, because she reminded me of my mother, and I insulted her because she reminded me of my mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you tell the story of a counselor, and they happen to live in Chico. Like I say, there are a lot of people in your book that I happen to know here in Chico. And you tell the story of Adrienne and Jerry, who live in Chico. And what does she bring to your knowledge of marriages?
Well, they were the only couple I know who made polyandry work. And she's a therapist, and she works with people who are interested in non-traditional sexual arrangements.
Because when you get married, the underlying assumption is you're going to be faithful to that one person.
Yeah.
And monogamy is the assumption when you get married. And I think she said, wait a minute, here's the way I feel about this. Is that true?
Yeah, she'd been married before, and they both had been married before and had children for previous marriages. So she wasn't willing to say, I'm going to only have sex with you for the rest of my life. I love you, and I want to marry you, but I want you to know that I'm not ruling out relationships with other people. And so they both made that work. I think there are jealousies and the kind of issues that you would expect that came up, but they were able to deal with it. I personally couldn't. I would be jealous. I would be upset. I wouldn't have time for the complexities of multi-layers of relationships, but they had the fortitude and the know-how to make it work. They're together.
For 27 years. Well, I think this might be encouraging too, reading your book and seeing the wide spectrum of possible relationships, because then if I met somebody and he says, I want to be monogamous, and I'd say, well, he's not the only one. There are other people who feel this way. So I think it's helpful to read these stories and say, oh, I may be an outlier, but there are other people who feel like I do or have similar experiences, and I can learn from them.
Yeah.
So Adrienne and Jerry had a non-traditional marriage. And you have other stories of non-traditional marriages. For example, you have a chapter, same-sex and trans marriages. And I was thinking, oh, I don't know about that. But I was just as intrigued, and I found people that I knew in that chapter too. Like I say, so many people that I found. And what was your take on interviewing these people?
Well, the most interesting to me were the trans couples, because I was interested in terms of our gender differences, the effect of hormones, because 3 out of 4 of the 2 couples take hormones, so they'll be trans. And they said that the main effect the hormones had was to whom they were attracted. Like someone who was identified as female at birth, who transformed to male, said that before she'd think, oh, that's an attractive woman or whatever. But then when she was taking testosterone, I was like, oh, that yummy. You know, it was like much more passionate, her visual turn on to a female body.
My guest is Gayle Kimball, and she has written a lot of books on relationships. After a break, I'll be talking again with Gayle Kimball, whose book is Happy Marriages. You're listening to Nancy's Bookshelf on North State Public Radio. I'm Nancy Wiegman.
I'm Margaret Werman. We're living through history, and the world's newsroom has the first draft.
If journalists leave a scene, it becomes a black hole. Then the world doesn't find out what's happening. And when the world doesn't know what's happening, human sympathy also evaporates.
Looking for answers and making sense of global events as they happen. Join us on The World.
Today at noon here on North State Public Radio. 91.7 FM Chico and 88.9 FM Reading, streaming online at myNSPR.org. Support comes from Save Our Water, sharing water-saving tips like adjusting sprinklers and adding drip irrigation so water goes only where it's needed. Fixing outdoor leaks and adding a little mulch can also go a long way. More at SaveOurWater.com. Nancy's Bookshelf continues here on NSPR.
I'm Nancy Wiegman, and you're listening to Nancy's Bookshelf on North State Public Radio. I'm back with my guest, Gayle Kimball, and she's a Chico author, but she has a world view of the subjects she deals with in her 20 books she has published. And she has a book on masculinity, and that is actually your most recent book, A Global Dialogue, 33 Men Speak Out on the subject of masculinity. So you've looked at this question of relationships for a lot of different angles. Now, on the cover of this book we're talking about, you have a couple, and they have big smiles on their faces, and they're being showered with rose petals and probably rice. And what did you learn from them?
That's a Greek couple, and I had a chance to meet her when I was in Greece, and the hardest part for them was having children and the fatigue. So I think it's important for people to be wide open eyes when they marry, to know that children are very challenging, because the children do not enhance romance, and you're tired. And when you're tired, how interested are you in sex or romance? Probably not very much. So,
and especially the mother, the wife, not tonight, dear, I'm too tired.
Yeah. Him too. You're going to be sitting woman up at night. So this couple, Anthony and Alex, they knew each other in middle school, and he had a crush on her, but she thought he was a grade below her, so he wasn't suitable. But they remained friends, and then they got together in their 30s, and now they run a business together. It's a really good tourist agency that does individual tours. Like I did one on the political scene in Athens that That's how I got to meet her. But the other thing is they have a lot of help because they hire a woman from Georgia who lives in and helps take care of the kids. So the fact
Georgia meaning not United States, Georgia.
the country, yeah. So the fact that they have the money to have live-in help and they're still fatigued and stretched thin means it's even harder for people who don't have the money or don't have grandparents to fill in and that kind of thing. So the point is having children, people need to realize, is a challenge to the marriage. And when they do have children, the people in 50-50 marriage books said they had to leave the house, like go stay in a motel in town or to go dancing and be in a hot tub or something. So I think it's not that we don't want children, it's just we need to recognize that you need to work at structuring in date night, little trips, time to talk to each other. There was one study that the average couple that Gottman reported on, they talk 35 minutes a week. And a lot of that is about, did you carry out the trash and did you check the kids' homework? So people in this country are too busy often to take the time to be friends and to be romantic partners. And I think that's a really, really, really important point, that in countries like Scandinavia, they don't have that problem. They don't work as long, they have good quality, affordable childcare, healthcare, elder care, free university. So our social system is set up for a homemaker wife. And since, 45% of married couples are dual earners, it's a major strain. So we shouldn't have to be so tired, so stressed, so often unhappy, which is a strain on the marriage. And another point that goes along with that is the people most likely to be unhappy in divorce are people who are low income because it's stressful. Masters and Johnson, the sex therapist who later divorced, pointed out that pair bonding, PAIR, pair bonding is based on the shared memory of good times. So I think it's really important for couples, especially those who have kids, to know that pair bonding is based on the shared memory of better time, and you better schedule in a weekly babysitter so you can have a date night.
Well, speaking of scheduling, I noticed this was some years ago when we didn't have children, but we had dogs. And our usual exchange was, have the dogs been fed, have the dogs been walked, have the dogs need this? And so I said, let's elevate our conversation by sitting down, scheduling a time to talk about what are our dreams? Dear, what is your dream for this month or this year? And I found that was really helpful. So I liked your suggestion about scheduling things, because otherwise it's easy to get so involved in these things that are not so important.
Right.
And get consumed by it.
Right.
Now, let me remind people that you are Gayle Kimball, and the book we're discussing is Happy Marriages. Now, you have a couple, in your chapter on teen lovers, you have a couple in Ukraine. And our curiosity about this country has zoomed of late. So what did you learn about this couple in Ukraine?
Well, Oya and Maxine are in, luckily, Western Ukraine. So I've been talking with him on Facebook, and they're okay. And he's a teacher, and she's a college professor. And they've been teaching online. I guess they're not leaving home, the students or the teachers, to go to school because they're afraid of getting bombed, even in the West. But they were in my Teen Lovers, chapter 9. She was a teenager when they met. They lived in the same neighborhood, and he would pass by her house and whatever. Also, they live with her parents, and they have like a little separate wing in her parents' big house. So that's another kind of social support. They have built-in childminders and help with family life. So I really do want to emphasize that a major problem with U.S. marriages, why we have a higher divorce rate than, say, Canadians, is because we're more stressed because we don't have things like paid parental leave that Congress won't pass. We don't have affordable quality child care. And so we're stressed, and that drains marriage.
Anything else you'd like to add that you learned about the culture as well as the couple in Ukraine?
A lot of them are Orthodox Christians, and I think you'll hear a lot about God protecting them and cursing the Russians and the Russians going to hell. So it's kind of part of Orthodox Christian thinking. But I do want to say that I think we all are so impressed with the Ukrainian spirit, and I love those people on the border who, this is the Russian Navy, surrender, and the people said, no, go, you know what, yourself. And I mean, that's just so, it's just delightful and courageous. And I was happy to find out they were captured and not killed. So.
Yeah, because I did wonder if you had an update on this couple.
Yeah, they're okay.
Now, there's a couple in your book, in your chapter on teen lovers, and I have this couple. She wrote a book, speaking now of Teresa and Joe Matthews, because she wrote this wonderful book on tips for dealing with cancer. I guess you would call it tips. And so, because I knew them, one Valentine's, I invited them into the studio and said, Joe and Terry, would you tell your story? And it was, I enjoyed reading the story that you have in your book. All these couples are special. But Teresa and Joe met because you have, this chapter's called Teen Lovers. Mm-hmm. And then, how do they get along?
They met in high school. They were in math class together, and she was like the good student, and he was kind of like the bad boy, make jokes in class boy. And they fell in love, and they both went to Berkeley together, and then she helped put him through med school as a pharmaceutical salesperson in a day when women didn't do that. And his medical practice has been, I would say, like having a lover. You know, it's been challenging because, you know, you never know if he was going to get called in to do surgery on Christmas or the kid's birthday or, you know, the important game that the child was playing. So I think that was the biggest challenge, not that they met as teens, but that his practice, medical practice, was so consuming. And now she's really happy that he retired.
Well, I thought of you too because, and not only do I like to dance, but you love to dance.
Yes.
And I love the story of how Joe became a convert to love dancing because Terry would ask him, would you come dancing? No. And finally you tell the story.
Well, I have danced with Joe, and I want to say he's a really good dancer, just like your husband was. So I'm glad the wives persisted. Well, he fell in love with waltz, and so he said, "Oh, if this feeling of the waltz is what ballroom dance is about, okay, I'm in." And so now he's as devoted to it as she is.
But it wasn't that easy because she kept asking him, and finally she said, Joe, this is the last time I'm ever going to ask you to dance with me. and apparently that was the last time she had to because he
said, I'll go to keep her quiet, but he really liked it.
And I actually have some video of Joe and Terry dancing. Another thing that they did, and I almost was in the same town in France that they were passing through. I think we missed each other by a couple of hours. This downtown square. And I knew they walked the Camino. This is in the pilgrimage route across Spain. They did that. They've done it several times.
Yeah.
But it's all the more amazing when you realize that Terry had health problems that were, I remember because I knew her before she got the diagnosis of cancer, she was concerned about a diagnosis of osteoporosis. And of course, when she got the diagnosis of cancer, osteoporosis fell off the radar screen.
Yeah.
She had to deal with that not only once but twice.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think people should look who have cancer in their family or among their friends. Look for Teresa Matthews' book on how to cope with a friend, a loved one who's going through cancer, chemo, all that business.
Yeah, I think hers is a very valuable book in that regard. And you also mentioned how some of these diseases are related to the brain. And Terry was able to, you would never know now that she ever dealt with 2 different cancers at 2 different times.
Right.
And her husband, Joe, was so supportive.
Yes.
It's really a touching story of how he supported her.
Yes.
This time.
And that's what the couples, the 30 couples, the new couples, they really emphasize that marriage isn't about being 50-50, because sometimes it's 80-20 and then it switches. And so it's about compromising, caring, giving more. It isn't always about 50-50.
And you know what? Sometimes I find it surprising that one partner will feel like, oh, you're spending too much energy taking care of me, forgetting all the times that she perhaps was taken care of by him.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad you made that point too. It can't be 50-50. And I think people will be reassured by reading this book and what they can learn from it. I mean, there's so much more in here that we haven't had a chance to touch on. Again, the title of your book, Happy Marriages, 30 Global Couples Tell Their Stories. And every story is just so absorbing, and you can learn from it. The author is Gayle Kimball, and she has a PhD, and your PhD is in sociology, isn't it, Gayle?
Religious studies.
Religious studies.
UC Santa Barbara.
Yeah. And we didn't even get to the role that religion has played in some of these relationships, but I'm sure people will want to read your book for themselves.
Oh, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Gayle. My guest has been Gayle Kimball. Her book is Happy Marriages, 30 Global Couples Tell Their Stories.
You've been listening to Nancy's Bookshelf, a production of North State Public Radio. You can find this and other episodes of Nancy's Bookshelf on our website, mynspr.org.
You are tuned to NSPR, North State Public Radio, KCHO Chico, and KFPR Reading, a service of CAP Radio, licensed to Chico State Enterprises. Listener-supported public radio connecting the communities of Northern California. We are on the web at mynspr.org.